This police department is not like any other police departments. Nope, they're not chasing illegal alien immigrants like those men wearing black suits. They are chasing dead people. The film opens with two police officers named Nick and Roy chasing a big fat man. But this is not your typical big fat man. It is very fast and can stick to the walls. 3 or 4 days ago, Nick buries pieces of gold in his backyard and put on treetop on top of it. He lives with his beautiful wife named Julia, and she notices the orange tree. Lying about it, Nick diverts the conversation to their financial situation, but Julia assures him that she does not need any material things, she just wants her husband. At their big drug bust, Bobby tries to convince Nick to continue their plan, pointing out that he needs the money for Julia. But Nick doesn't want to disappoint her, and he's determined to do the right thing. Nick promises Bobby that he will not drag his name into it. Unexpectedly, Bobby says he will turn in his gold too, saying that Nick is right. When suddenly their conversation is interrupted by another police officer. Saying that they got the address of another drug syndicate, they head out for another drug bust operation. On their way, Nick jokingly radios to the other police officer that Bobby has a word of motivation for the team. Riding with his friend's joke, Bobby reminds everyone not to get shot. On the contrary, it is Bobby who shot Nick during the raid on the drug syndicate. Saying that he cannot let Nick turn the gold in, Bobby shoots him and he falls to his death. But this is not the end for him yet. Nick opens up his eyes and time stopped around him. Looking up, he sees a vortex in the sky he's drawn into. Nick then finds himself in an office facing a woman named Mildred Proctor. Mildred explains that he missed the judgment, which will surely bring him down to hell because he's a dirty cop, because he has the skills they need. She then offers Nick to join the RIPD, or Rest in Peace department. Their job is to catch dead people that also miss the judgment, to put them where they truly belong. Hearing that they will bring him back to Boston, Nick immediately agrees. Mildred knows that he's doing it to get his old life back, but unfortunately, he will not. She just promised that he will get a good recommendation upon his judgment. She then explains to Nick that what they're catching is called deados. As stated, they are dead people who also miss judgment and are living with humans, but once popped, they are actually monsters inside. Nick asks how these deados are able to stay in the world of the living. Mildred answers that with many people dying every day, a few slip past the system. She then welcomes him to RIPD Boston. Afterward, Mildred introduces Nick to his partner Roy. Roy was a lawman when he was still alive, and a former lover of Mildred. Just like Nick, he was also killed by his partner, and now he prefers to work alone. But Mildred tells him he has no choice. The two men go back to the world of the living, and Nick watches his own funeral. He then runs to Julia and tries to tell her the truth, but she doesn't recognize him. The police officers in the area, including Bobby, stop him. It turns out that in the eyes of the living, the RIPD officers look and sound completely different. It's like the universe itself won't let them reveal their true identities. For their living identity, Nick is an old Chinese guy, while Roy is a hot blonde woman. On their first mission together, Roy explains that deados leave negative trails wherever they go, and that's why it's easy to trace them. Dying plants, failing electronic devices, negative energy, everything that has negativity can be connected to a deado. Then, the two questions a man named Stanley. They throw questions after questions until Stanley pops off and reveals his true appearance as a deado. Nick is about to handcuff the deado, but it suddenly fights back, ripping its own arm and escapes. On its way out, it swallows pieces of gold. The two chase the deado and Nick beats him with his own arm. The deado vomits the pieces of gold. Nick recognizes it as the same as the gold that he and Bobby stole before. Distracted, the deado tries to attack Nick. Luckily, Roy shoots it dead. He then mocks Nick for his performance. Annoyed, Nick throws him in front of a running bus, causing Roy's hat to fly through the air. It pisses Roy off big time. At the station, Nick convinces Roy that they should investigate more about the gold because Stanley the deado did everything to protect it. Roy declined at first, but Nick soothes the man's ego and he manages to convince him in the end. The next day, Roy takes Nick to his informant, Elliot, another deado. Nick asks Elliot about the gold, but he gets nothing. It turns out, Nick noticed that he was lying. They watch Elliot from afar and are surprised to see Bobby meets with the deado. Bobby gets the gold from Elliot and then leaves. Finally, picking his interest, Roy helps Nick with his investigation and follows Bobby to Nick's house. There, they see Bobby digs up the gold that Nick buried. Nick sees how disappointed Julia is in him, while Roy demands an explanation from Nick. He says he did it for money. He doesn't know what is in the gold connection to the deados. The two follow Bobby to the airport when he meets with a man. Nick and Roy ambush the man and bring it to a freezer at gunpoint. They question it about the gold, but the man spits nothing but arrogance. Nick threatens to pop him forcefully, but he did it on his own. He then turns into a big fat man from earlier. Back to the present, the two chase after the deado. The two are having a hard time and they're causing accidents around. In the end, Nick manages to grab the gold from the deado, but it escaped. At the station, Mildred is scolding them for letting a deado not alone escape, but be exposed to the public in the middle of the day. As a result, they are taken into the Eternal Affair. There, they discover that the gold is part of an artifact called Staff of Jericho. The Staff of Jericho enables the tunnel to the afterlife to go in reverse. Using the artifact, the dead will rain down on the world of the living and it will be the end of it. Also, the two are suspended and will be subject to a hearing, which will likely end with them getting erased. Knowing that his hours are numbered, Nick goes to Julia to try to reveal himself once again. Although it seems to be working at first, Julia dismisses him and leaves. It turns out, Roy sees them and he talks some sense out of Nick, saying that he needs to let Julia move on and live without him, that it's their job to make a peaceful world for the living people they left behind. But Nick didn't take this advice very well and speak ill against Roy. After some time, Nick realizes that he was wrong and apologizes to Roy. The two men then agree to stop the incoming apocalypse. Nick suspects that Bobby isn't just a bagman, but a deado himself. However, he didn't notice any deado vibes from him. Roy says that there's a rare artifact that can mask the negative energy released by the deado. Nick then realizes that Bobby always carries a certain bracelet with him, saying it's from his grandmother. Meanwhile, Bobby meets with another deado to give him a piece of another artifact. Their conversation indicates that they are about to complete the gold for the Staff of Jericho. The next day, Julia calls Bobby to tell him about Nick's revelation to her last night. This gives Bobby the idea that Nick is back as an officer of the RIPD. As if on cue, Nick and Roy arrive at Bobby's place and he quickly hides with him another piece of gold. The two corners him, and Nick orders Bobby to remove the metal from his bracelet. Then, the surrounding instantly rots as soon as Bobby takes off the metal out of his body. After confiscating the gold, Nick and Roy arrest Bobby, but he didn't fight back at all. At the station, other officers seem to have caught many deado, one of which is the deado that Bobby met last night. It turns out, Bobby and the other deados planned all of this. When the vault of evidence containing the gold opens, Bobby triggers the artifact that slows down the RIPD officer. The deados then make their move to collect the gold and escape. Roy manages to shoot the artifact, but it's too late. The deados already managed to go into the streets, revealing themselves to the public in daylight. The deado hands Bobby a phone, and he tells the big fat deado that they got all the gold. The big fat deado then orders other deados to start building the Staff of Jericho. A spiritual shootout happens as soon as the RIPD officers set foot in the world of the living. But being a man who grows from the old Western cowboy era, Roy easily takes the deados down. Then a vortex appears in the sky, and the two quickly follow Bobby and his gang. But the big fat deado and his ghost block off the road to the Commonwealth building where the artifact is being built. Also, deados got ghosts on the wheels to take on Nick and Roy on the streets. Using the falling cars from the rotting car park caused by the vortex, Nick drives swiftly to ditch the deados following them. Meanwhile, it turns out that Bobby ordered other deados to get Julia to him to use her blood as a sacrifice to complete the building of the Staff of Jericho. He pops off in front of Julia, which scared the living soul out of her. Going back to Nick and Roy, they are greeted by the big fat deado and his gang. Nick used his driving skills again to get rid of them. Meanwhile, at the top of the Commonwealth building, Bobby is about to sacrifice Julia to the artifact when Nick Julia without monologuing. This erupts a battle between the two RIPD officers and the deado. While they're busy fighting, the artifact starts sucking Julia's blood and gets activated. The dead then come pouring from the sky. The two make their way through the deados and Roy takes care of the artifact, while Nick comes face to face with Bobby. The two fight, but Bobby clearly has the upper hand. Having a hard time with the artifact, Roy decides to make a bullwhip and muster all his strength in pulling a truck down to the artifact to destroy it. Distracted, Nick manages to point a gun at Bobby and shoots him in the face. Nick quickly runs to Julia, but she is losing a lot of blood. The time stops around them, and Julia is finally able to see Nick's true appearance. Sharing a moment together, Nick tells Julia that she needs to move on and keep living. Saying that he'll always love her, Nick lets Julia go. She then wakes up in a hospital. A doctor who turns out to be a living identity of Mildred assures Nick and Julia will be alright. On their way out, Mildred tells them that the Eternal Affair decided to let off Nick with a warning, but adds 53 more years to Roy's term. Roy is pissed, but his mood changes when Mildred returns his cowboy hat. The movie ends with Nick getting a new living identity, a Girl Scout with orthodontic headgear on.